So recording now, and I'd like to welcome everybody officially to the Team Performance Inventory discussion. And we are going to talk about a very interesting, very powerful and useful model and a new, really exciting tool that helps us get our hands around that. And so thank you for coming to this introductory chat to the Team Performance Model and Inventory. And so what we are going to do here is talk to you. I am here. I'm the president principal consultant of OKA. I'm a co-author of this tool, but the lead author of this tool is David Cooper, who is the senior consultant for Impact America, and we've been friends for a long time and colleagues for much of that time, and we're really excited about the work we've done here. And so you'll be spend some significant time with David. So thank you, David, for being a part of this today. As we shift here to looking at some of this, I wanted to give you a sense of what we would be talking about over the next hour or so. David's going to introduce us in just a second to the team performance model. This is something that's been actively used within Impact International for many, many years. Only recently has it launched as something that the world can also access and use. It has made its way into this TPI assessment, and so I want to talk about, I'll introduce you to that and some of the highlights of this new tool. We'll stop and look at some questions, some of your questions, and chat about that. David's going to take us through some case study usages. So what has he been able to do with this tool? And so he'll talk about kind of views from the field. I'm going to talk a little bit about team development and how we pivot from insight to development, and then we'll wrap it up with one final bit of questions and development. So that's where we're going over the arc of our discussion. It is nice to have, we've got a really nice a full group here, so it's nice to see you. And if we could, so let's start, before we get into the tool, let's start with the model that underpins it. And so, David, welcome, and could you take us through the TPI model?
Great, thanks, Hyle, very much, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here. And this has been my world for probably the last 15 years or so. So the challenge for me today, given that we have an hour, is to try and offer the most concise, succinct, and relevant high-level information for you to get excited about the tool, and also recognize that with an hour, that may not provide as much as everyone wants. So we'll encourage you to reach out to Hyle and myself afterwards. I'm seeing that my voice is low, so we're going to try and get that a little louder. I will work on that for you. And
thank you.
All right.
Okay. We will get the sound
back
now.
in.
We can't hear you at all.
Fantastic. So if that's still low, let
Yes.
me know, and we'll try and pick that up a little bit for you. So in short, if the voice was low and you missed it, we're going to try and give you a good taste in this hour. It certainly won't be all the information that you're likely to want, so encourage you to continue the conversation with Hyle and I afterwards and during the Q&A sessions. From a high-level standpoint, though, Impact, we began this journey about 15 years ago, and we were 20 years into our 35, 37-year-old history at this point, in working with teams and realizing that we were working a lot with a number of very disparate models that addressed various elements of a team, wasn't quite giving us everything that we wanted in a common language tool or a single space to really work with teams to help them become as effective as possible, as successful as possible, and to perform at the highest levels possible. And some of the work that we did was to answer questions like, and to recognize that teams are the critical engine for performance in organizations. And those teams are always made up of unique sets of individuals. And the models and theories that we were working with, they answer various aspects of that. They'll address the team journey. They'll address team dysfunctions. They'll address the individual style, motives, and behaviors of those individuals on the team. And we were really looking for something that gave us access to what does a team need in order to be as effective as possible, to be as high performing as possible, to reach its clear stated goals. So the impact team performance model addresses that. It allows us to offer 6 critical domains for performance that we have been able to test through experience and research with teams, with organizations, with groups over the last 15 years or so. And the team performance inventory that we'll talk about a little later, that tool has given us access to even more research and data to really be able to identify what we believe to be a very effective common language tool and model for addressing team performance and allowing and helping teams to be as successful as possible. And that's what it is. You cannot look at this model and not see Tuckman, for instance, Katzenbach Smith, Lencioni, insert your history with teams and your own frameworks and models for teams here, and you're going to see them in this in the team performance model, as well as the addition of and the support of the research and testing that has come behind, really offering again this common language tool for really identifying those 6 critical domains, which look like this: external alignment, unified purpose, quality conversations, effective relationships, agreed approach, and high performance mindset. And we've been quite intentional about the language that we use for these domains and what underpins those domains. So what we want to do today is give you access to each of these 6 domains, give you a high-level definition of those, and then break for some Q&A to help our understanding of that before getting into the team performance inventory, which is the team diagnostic tool associated with this model. So, external alignment. This domain really has to do with a recognition of all of the eyes, if you will, that are on a team. In any team, working group, organization for that matter, there are internal, external stakeholders. There are people with interest in what that team, what that group is doing. So this domain serves to understand and serve the need that we need to be knowing the expectations of those stakeholders. They need to be knowing the expectations that we have on them. So this is about really aligning with the internal and external collective understanding and needs around everyone that has an investment in this team's performance. So it has to do with the context of that team, the soil in which the team is planted and grows, which is a really nice metaphor, I suppose, for this, with recognizing the ecosystem within which the team or the group resides. It has a lot to do with that stakeholder, internal and external support. And when I say internal and external, I mean within the organization and outside of the organization, and those expectations that we have of others around us and them of us. Unified purpose, at its very root, is simply the reason the team exists. It is the shared, common, unified, collective understanding of why we have been brought together as a specific team, group, or organization. And even saying that answers that question differently. A very specific intact project team within an organization is going to have a different unified purpose than the broader team it serves and is a part of, and the organization will have. So it absolutely has to do with a real understanding of why we exist, what we're meant to do, an understanding of our performance metrics, why when we've been brought together, what are our goals and intended outcomes as a team, as a group, what are the tasks and reasons for the way in which or why we're doing work together. Effective relationships, this is really the domain of psychological safety, to borrow Amy Edmondson, and just simply the trending momentum that psychological safety is gaining in the workplace and in the industry. And this is the domain that really serves the need, the mindsets and the attitudes, if you will, of trust, openness, and honesty within the team. It has to do with that collective understanding and appreciation that we have for one another in a group, in a team. And really the feelings that we have, the ability to say collectively that we have that psychological safety, that we have that trust and openness and honesty and respect with one another, for one another, and that we're spending the time necessary to build those relationships and nurture those relationships in the team, in the organization. Quality conversations is a domain that really has to do with the behaviors and the actions that we take with one another that demonstrate that we have the quality of those interactions. Conversations meaning not just auditory communication, but also the behaviors that we have and interact together with. It really has to do with understanding the roles and resources within the team and the diversity. Big D, little d diversity here. Insert whatever diversity we need to understand to be effective in our performance, and quality conversations represent our need to really understand who does what well and allowing that person and engaging and deploying ourselves appropriately so that we really have actions on behalf of each other that really engage our strengths and our resources well, that we have communication patterns and habits that show we understand those strengths and we understand how we're deploying ourselves appropriately. It has to do with active engagement. And really, if I hashtag this domain, I often call it leveraging diversity, acting and behaving in support of the diversity, the roles and resources within the team. Agreed approach is our more tactical domain. This is the domain that addresses the need for rules of engagement, the need for codes of conduct, the needs for spoken, unspoken, written, unwritten rules of engagement that show we understand how we get things done. These are the processes that we put into place. They are really how we work, the procedures that we put into place. Sometimes this may entail a team charter. Sometimes this may be very organic, unspoken rules of engagement, if you will, habits and traditions that we understand collectively as a team and hold ourselves accountable to so that we can get the work done in the best way possible. And finally, high performance mindset. This is the domain of continuous improvement, of continuous learning. This is the domain of real mutual accountability from team members in service of other team members' desires, passions, and in service of other team members' development opportunities. So there's two lenses to high performance mindset. One that simply has to do with continuous improvement. What are we doing to constantly learn? Hashtag I use for this often is Kaizen. What are we doing to continuously improve? And the second lens to this is really about our understanding and taking the time to understand through one another what are our aspirations, what do we need to develop, what are we needing to working on, and acting and behaving in such a way that supports that understanding. Really wanting to learn and get better together, take on risks and challenge. Our appetite for risk and innovation comes out underneath of this domain, and really supporting that growth, development, and continuous feedback within the group from a growth standpoint. So that, in a high-level nutshell, is a quick overview for you of these 6 domains. And we posit that when we really look at teams and look to understand what a team needs to be as high-performing as possible, we can start to brainstorm and think about all those needs for days. And when we bucket those together, they bucket into these 6 domains, these 6 critical domains of team performance. And underneath of that, you begin to underpin and find critical aspects of team needs and individual needs and the actions that need to take place to service that. I believe that is, we're going to go into the report here, Hyle, or?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and go right into the report. Those of you who have phoned in, if your mic is on, if you could mute your mic, the sound will be better actually for everybody if you would mute your mic if you haven't. That'll prevent some of the feedback. But one of the things about when we're looking at this impact model that is, excuse me, really effective at helping you kind of shift and categorize and observe almost any group you encounter. So how do we capture data and actually present a team report? How do we capture a group profile? And one of the things that I was so struck by with the TPI is that this is structured almost on a 360 model that is going to look at the team as a whole, and everybody that is a part of that team or that's invited to contribute to this portrait is going to describe the team as a whole, and that's where this portrait comes from, as opposed to every individual being kind of identified as my volume is high, maybe too high. Maybe I should just stop yelling. That's might help. But if the but the idea of like say through the Myers-Briggs or through emotional intelligence or the DISC or some other tool that actually is about style or type, and then we build the team, that the team is basically a collection of all of its members together. This is a fundamentally different and I think very powerful way of looking at the team as a whole, as identified by everyone that's on it. So let's take a look at how this the TPI came about from the model that David just introduced us to. So very early on, each one of these domains is actually presented in what's called an agreement index. Every one of those domains has within it 5 very specific questions, 5 very specific items that everyone comes in and reacts to. Are those statements something they totally disagree with, they completely agree with them, or somewhere in the middle? And all of those things come together to actually make up this overall agreement index. So this one happens to be for external alignment. And so the respondents all react to 5 different items, and then they are all kind of averaged together, and here we get to see so where is everyone's thought in terms collectively on external alignment or unified purpose. So it starts with a kind of a global executive summary on all of the 6 domains that David just showed us. But what's really useful about this, just so when you look at this, the dark gray bar represents the range of the respondents' responses. And so here we see that some people said they completely disagreed with some external alignment items, and some people completely agreed with them. So it really did span the whole set of options. And so the idea is that the lowest score is where the gray bar begins. The highest score is where the gray bar ends, and the white box there indicates the average of all the responses together. And so that is so we get to see on a very high level these questions. So we've got a question, and we'll come back to these questions, but I wanted to let you know that we're capturing them. So how does the size of the team impact the results? Is this related to MBTI at all? No, that's not a dumb question. That's a great question. It's not related directly to Myers-Briggs. However, what a Myers-Briggs type table will show you is the cognitive hardwiring, the cognitive preferences of the people on the team. What this will tell you is the actions we engage in, our behaviors with each other, are going to show certain skills and certain focuses, and we're better at some things than others. And what the TPI is going to point you toward is an action plan that we as a collective need to be better with unified purpose. We need better quality conversations. Now that's where type, if you have it, and you don't need it, but if you happen to have it, that could work very well, because what an ENFP team does to engage better quality conversations may well be different from what an ISTJ team does to engage quality conversations. And so the TPI will let you know what you need to do. Type might help you in how best do we do it. So there's a good linkage there but this is not in any way rooted in psychological type. It's a great question. And Laura, we will get to the size of the team in just a minute when we'll take that on with your question. That's a good one. What's so useful about this isn't the macro domain. This actually lets you get into each domain, and each domain has 5 very specific entry points. And this is how we've kind of captured this and presented to you. So within the tool, there each domain has 5 responses, so there are 30 of these responses in all. And so this particular one is for unified purposes. I'm genuinely committed to this team's purpose. So that was the response. So everybody invited to participate in this process, somewhere from completely disagree to completely agree, they have the option to answer. And when this team was actually polled, the average came out to be 5.71. And so that little vertical line there shows you what the average response is. The green line represents the range. So all of the people were between strongly agree and completely agree. And then the average is by the bar there, but you're given the arithmetic average also. You're given the numerical average, so you can have that as well. And then if there are people who, for whatever reason, opt out or cannot answer, I don't feel like I know enough to answer that, then they kind of step out of the scoring, and we set those aside. So you can see how many people answered versus how many people felt they couldn't rate that particular response. Now, when we take a look at that in the putting of the report together, we were looking at, so what does this mean? What does it mean that when asked about this being committed to the team's response, all the responses were 5s and 6s? Well, we came up with statements, summary statements that actually took into account the variance of the answers and the average score. So were the scores low, average, high, and how much variance was there in all of the scores? Were people saying the same things or saying different things? And given those 2 facts, we came up with a summary statement here to help the users kind of get some use out of this. So most members are highly committed to the group's team purpose and allowing for more successful and focusing goal setting and role task assignments. So that is given there. What's important are 2 follow-up questions. After considering that item and the summary statement, the question that the team really needs to decide is, how accurate is that? Is that an accurate statement? And separate from its accuracy, how relevant is it? There are things that a team will consider, yeah, that's totally accurate and we don't care. It isn't very relevant right now. Or this does seem really relevant and I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's accurate. So that opens up the debate about, well, what is the accurate view here? And so that is, I think, an important piece, and that's done with each of these domain items. Now, just quickly to show you another one. We won't go as deeply, but that each one of these is here. You've got the item. It gives you the average response, and then it shows you the response range, what the lowest and highest were. That it gives you a summary interpretation, and then the 2 summary questions that the team needs to grapple with and answer themselves. Does it seem accurate, and does it seem relevant? And so that is a critical component of this TPI report. Now, that is followed by narrative comments. Every domain actually has an area where there are some narrative comments, and people are invited to answer the question, and the report actually gives you verbatim what each person said without attribution. So that you still have some anonymity here. Now, that's one of the things that makes the TPI variable in length, because some people don't answer, some people answer very briefly, some people answer quite a lot, and everything they write is put down here. So it really gives you the chance to really get into those data. at the end of the narrative comments of each domain, we again have these kind of summary questions. And so do the narrative comments confirm or contradict the numerical data, or both? I've had narrative comments that actually seem to somewhat contradict or be held in tension with the numerical data, and sometimes they just reinforce. That's a really interesting conversation. And then also, is it critical or urgent? Sometimes some of these domains feel hot to touch, and others feel like nice to haves, and that's nice to know what's urgent and what isn't. And so as we go through, the point is, here we've got 6 domains, 30 specific behaviors that feed these domains, a lot of rich data. How do we focus in on, now what do we do? And so one of the things that we offer at the end of the report is this full domain summary. And this is a list of all 30 items in descending order of average. And so this is a lot of information. Even in the summary form. And so one of the ways that we suggest actually using this is to take a look at the top 7. Not that there's nothing magical about 7, it's just when you look at the top 7, that's the top quartile, the top 25%. And so when you do look at just the top 7, some things can jump out at you. When I look at this, what jumps out at me is all those green ones. That's unified purpose. And so this happens to be a team where unified purpose plays really strongly and centrally in this team's focus. That's certainly good. The same team, when you take a look at the bottom 7, so this is the bottom 25%, that similarly you have some things jumping out at you. Those red things seem to be bunched up. That's agreed approach. And there are even a couple of gold ones. That's the high performance mindset. And so we've got, you start to see what's trending toward the top and trending towards the bottom in terms of what do we need to look at, what are our strengths and what are our challenge points. That's one way of approaching that question. And so as we, that's a quick summary of the tool. And so let's take a look at, we'll shift layouts here, but everything else is the same. And if you could start, David, would you take the question on the size of the team and how that plays in?
Thanks, Laura. I'm interpreting the question a couple of different ways, so let me know if I've answered it the way you intended. Because the first,
I'm sorry, as David is answering, I invite everybody to, if you have a question, if you're curious about something, if you have a comment, please type it into the Q&A pod there on your screen. Sorry to interrupt, David.
So the short answer to the team size impacting the results question is it's less about the team size impacting the results and the team size that we're choosing. So in other words, once we've chosen the team intentionally that we're surveying through the team performance inventory, then the team, we want everybody in that team to respond. In other words, if we have a 12-person team, let's make sure we get all 12 respondents because more data is great. We want all the data that we can get. The team size question from a result standpoint more impacts how we're using it. So I mentioned earlier this idea that the model becomes really useful for intact project teams, working groups, organizations small and large, and organizations within an organization. So we want to be intentional about who we're surveying and how. So for example, if we're surveying a 50-person department, if you will, in an organization that has sub-teams related to it, we're likely doing multiple TPIs where we might be doing small, a leadership teams, all of their, if it's a 7-person leadership team, we might do that, each of those 7 teams. We then may also do the larger team because we're addressing different things with them, particularly around certain domains that have to do with our interactions together, our unified purpose, importantly. So it's more about the team size we're choosing. Are we choosing that team size very intentionally, recognizing the implications of what that team is, if you will? What's the shared common purpose of that group? And the more granular we have, the different results we're going to get.
That's good. The I will. Brian asked about certification and access and how do you train this. And so, Brian, we will touch on that toward the end. I've got some things documented for you. So we're going to push that off for now. Could you, David, address Aaron's question, how this might complement or contrast the work of Sibit Drexler?
Yeah, you bet. And that's I call that one the bouncing ball one, the Sibit Drexler model. And again, they're after a few different things. So our team performance model absolutely complements and blends into not only Drexler Sibit, but if you work with Lencioni, if you do a lot of work with Tuckman and expand on that work the way some organizations do, or even Google's Project Aristotle, which really looks at individual team members' needs within a team. This model maps to all of those in a number of different ways. So with Drexler Sibit, you're going to get mapping to that kind of team life cycle that they look at and trajectory that they look at. And again, it's a common language tool. And to somewhat answer this question and the first question around MBTI, what the tool and model, what we really like about it, others may not, what we really like about it is it's very agnostic from the standpoint of the prescription based on the data. So as Kyle mentioned, the model and particularly the team performance inventory, it's going to give you access to what is needed, what's going on in the team. The solution set for that is really super agnostic from the standpoint if you get to then leverage your coaching, your facilitator, your tool bag. So if you work with MBTI in an organization, if you work with some other team model in an organization, if you work with, if you have access to other frameworks, then you can decide which ones will best fit into that. We have in the report at the back end, and for coaches that are certified, we also have resource documents that give you, hey, if you're working on this domain, you can't go wrong doing these things. We have prescriptive action steps, if you will, that we know will help. However, what's really going to help is going to be a combination of what's in a specific coach's toolkit, what's the particular makeup of that group is, that team is, and their discussion and conversation around what they need to do to increase a specific domain.
This is another one that's right up your alley there, David. To your knowledge, how transparent are client teams being with each other about how they individually rate items? Do they own their individual scores or keep it private?
Well, the teams that I work with, we get them unprivate very quickly because the tool is not terribly useful for us as a team until we do that. So the confidentiality and anonymity of the TPI is there simply for let's capture the best data that we can and let's quickly get that team together to have conversations in an environment where they provide themselves the safety, if you will, to own up to it. For example, if I'm the one guy on the team that was all the way down the left-hand side on that summary table disagreeing with everything, what do we need to do to make sure that I can share that information? But we try and get very quickly, and in my experience, that's not a terribly difficult thing to do. Sometimes it means we're not going right in with the data. Sometimes it means I'm working with team leaders and their teams to do a session or two before even looking at the results to generate some kind of cultural acceptance and create that environment in which people can become transparent with their responses.
And the last one to you, David, that was nice. Somebody's used the Team Dimensions profile as kind of a lightweight assessment tool, and so any comments about that, and how would you react to that? That's not a tool I'm aware of.
And also, I think how lightweight is this assessment? I suppose I'll work back into it. So this assessment is, from a lightweight standpoint, I suppose that's in the eye of the beholder. I've used it in a lightweight manner, meaning I've used it to simply introduce the model and the framework and do informal diagnostics with teams before even getting to the TPI as a way to begin conversations and to really get into what it is that they do. The tool itself becomes quite heavyweight very quickly in that the data that it's producing and the conversations that it's generating. And for most of the teams that I'm working with, really looking at the team performance inventory and its data, it becomes heavyweight fairly quickly, because what it does is generate the conversation and dialogue necessary for a team to really unpack exactly what it is they need to be doing to perform at higher levels, and then they're committing to those actions and really following through on them over a period of time. And usually that's 9 to 12 months from a testing standpoint, at least, when we're really looking to see shifts. Of course, there's shifts, right away as they dig into the data. But it can serve kind of cursory, lightweight duty if you need it to. The reason that this team performance inventory exists, and the reason that we're excited about it, and Kyle and I have been really partnering together on it, is because it's become very clear that it's quite the heavyweight tool, and the probably 3 or 4 dozen clients that we at Impact have been working with the tool with globally over the last probably 6 to 8 years absolutely love it, and are continuing to use it year over year.
And that's agreed. I want to jump on this one last question, and then we're going to scoot in. Somebody's asked about how do you pivot to an action plan, and that's naturally coming up. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And somebody asks about the marriage of this with EQ. Are there action recommendations of the TPI that begin to mobilize a team or its leaders toward addressing weaknesses and leveraging some of their strengths? It does do that. In fact, one of the things that I find that the marriage of the TPI and the EQI is particularly strong, because in my thinking, having used both of them extensively, is that 3 of the domains are emotional intelligence, are directly rooted there. Effective relationships, quality conversations, and high performance mindset are built conceptually on an EQ framework. I mean, not overtly, but I mean they're touching the very same thing. The other 3 domains, you could argue, are related, but they require EQ to actually get them done, and that's external alignment, unified purpose, and agreed approach. If we're going to come together and get external alignment, unified purpose, or an agreed approach, we need to exercise emotional intelligence to do that, even if emotional intelligence isn't the point. But for 3 of those, quality conversations, effective relationships, and high performance mindset, those are components of emotional intelligence. And so it's so the overlap between those 2 tools are great. And you can use EQ to help spur this, or if you don't even use EQ and just stick with TPI, which you can do, it just so happens you're doing EQ work anyway, because you're activating those behaviors. That's a great question. Let's get back to content. There's some interesting stuff that we want to take you on now. Come in and kind of put a couple of cherries on top, and then we can take you into, and then we'll come back to this Q&A spot. And so, what are some views from the field in terms of a couple of ways you have and can use this?
Sure. And this is really almost about kind of continuing this conversation of the heavy lifting that the tool can do. This is the marriage, if you will, of the data that you're getting back, the model itself, and what teams can be doing with that data. So we just have 3 examples to highlight how we use the report, how it can really be different from team to team. And so we're really comparing 2 different teams and the way in which we can interpret the data and really start to read into it. And the narrative comments is one, whereas Hayo mentioned before, the narrative comments are oftentimes giving us really interesting data to support the scaled questions, as well as data that when we start to really unpack the language and the words and the statements that team members are making about itself, that they may start to point to other domains, frankly, and that's part of the conversation. For unified purpose, one of the questions, the narrative questions, is how is the clarity of purpose demonstrated within this team? And this is just an example of how we can find language within the narrative comments that speak to disparate levels of how we're demonstrating it, and an evolving evolution, if you will, of how we're demonstrating the clarity of our purpose, which gives us insight into how clear is our purpose, what kind of intentionality do we have behind it. At the highest level, this team is understood. We're identifying ideas. The team is pursuing. So we have language here that really starts, for me as a coach, to give me triggers for this particular team on the top here, that, okay, this may be an opportunity because it's fledgling, perhaps. We're doing it at a high level. We're sort of pursuing it and identifying it right now as we go. Versus a team, this team below, that clearly has some agreement and some momentum behind strategic reviews. That's mentioned twice. The review of the strategy, let's call that a strategic review, a review against the work that we're doing. So the narrative comments become really powerful to provide further insight and curiosity, frankly, around what's happening in the team. So for me as a coach, what this does is helps to guide the type of conversation I'm going to be having with particular teams, and the work that we'll then do with them. The summary page is another fantastic kind of treasure trove of data. As an INFP, if you know Myers-Briggs, I often go to this page first, frankly. It is towards the back of the report, and that's quite intentional. What I do is I go to it to trigger some curiosities in myself that I then have top of mind as I read through a report before working with a team or with a leader and then the team. And it just simply gives us some really interesting things to be curious about. For example, oftentimes you may find single or one or two people that are at the far left-hand side, meaning they completely or strongly disagree with the statements about the team, whereas the rest of the team may be in more agreement. And the first assumption we can make, especially the team or team leaders can make often, is, hey, that's John Doe, because John Doe never, agrees with anything. And I find equally, if not more often than it being that single person, it is a random bunch of different team members simply strongly disagreeing or completely disagreeing with a particular question. So it starts to get us curious about, okay, how do we create an environment to let those people be transparent back to that question? And two, let's be coaching the team, and particularly our leaders, on the differing approaches a leader or a facilitator may take with multiple people that are showing up as that one left-hand side person, or that person themselves, because we're going to engage a little differently. The other thing that Heil talked about was this top quartile and bottom quartile. Oftentimes, and this might be too small for you to see, but what's going on here is a lot of times I may find that a clumping of those top quartile questions and bottom quartile questions are in a polarization of themselves with regards to this aspect of the questions. There's an aspect of the questions that really gives us insight into the individual team member and their contribution to the team, and the team's contribution to the individual team member. So again, my perception as an individual team member of my contribution to the team, and my perception, our perception as individual team members of the team's contribution to us. And every now and then, and this particular one is an example of that, where we're saying to ourselves as a team, hey, individually, we really think we contribute a lot to this team. So we're praising ourselves individually. Whereas at the bottom of the report, what we're saying to ourselves, those bottom quartile responses are saying, you know what, we don't think the team gives us that much back. And that opens up a very interesting conversation for a team to have. Other summary reports will be, a complete mix of those. But I find quite often that I get into situations where, that team to individual dynamic may show itself, and that becomes an interesting part of the conversation that we have. And I've seen it flipped as well, of course. It's not always just the individual to team versus team to individual. And there's loads of other great insights from this summary page that that I always like to say are curiosities, because until we really have that conversation with the team, we can't assume anything about them. They just become really interesting curiosities. Another thing that you can start to get on the summary page, however, becomes more apparent in the actual domain breakdown is this, and this is the last example from a team to team comparison. So say we have two teams, A on the left, B on the right, two teams that have decided they want to work on high performance mindset. They have identified high performance mindset, that domain, as a gap area, and they want to go work on it. We could assume that we need to do the same thing with those teams. However, these two teams have really highlighted for themselves differing critical aspects of that domain. So there's 5 Likert scales per question, and the report, when it's generated, will list those questions in descending order of their average. So these happen to be the bottom 2 average questions, the lowest average for each of these teams. And if we look at them, and again, this might be a little small for you to see, but on the left for Team A, they're really looking at how team members actively commit to their individual development, and if that they're focusing more on learning than blame when it comes to mistakes that are made in the team. And that's important information with regards to what we're going to address, what we're going to work on as a team. Whereas on the right-hand side, you have a team saying that what we're not doing very well is seeking ways to improve our performance and really sharing feedback with each other on the team. So the actions and the kind of intervention, if you will, that I'm crafting with the team when I'm working with them would be quite different from Team A and B here, even though they've both identified high performance mindset as a domain that they would be working on. So just a few examples to breathe some life into how we start to be curious about, interpret the report, and use it with teams in practice.
Great. And one of the things, and this is something that Impact has always done, and it's always been a hallmark at OKA, is how do you take a tool, whatever the tool, but how do you take a tool and pivot from whatever insight, whatever data it gave you, to action? So what are you going to do now? How do you use this? And so the thing that is so helpful about this model and this tool to me is that it gives us 6 very particular access points. Somebody asked the question before about how do you move to action? How do you come up with an action plan? And so there are some ways that you can be very nuanced. In fact, a lot of what David was just talking about shows his really expertise with this tool about comparing and looking, and there are lots of things that when we get into the training we can point you to. But on a very simple level, there's taking a look at the summary. And I've had people that just look at that summary sheet and look at what's bunched up at the bottom. That's a domain we don't have much of, so let's work on that one. It can be as simple as that. So it doesn't need to be, but the point is, once you've decided what it is that you want to work on, we need more unified purpose, we need more quality conversations, and there are only 6. So that once you pick one, maybe 2, but 1 is even better, I would argue. What do we do now to do better at that? Well, the report itself actually has some suggested action by domain. And so here are a couple of external alignment things, a couple of unified purpose ideas. And so we give you 2 or 3 developmental exercises or actions, activities that you can do for any given domain. For agreed approach, the one Dave was just showing and talking about, we've taken you through a number of steps on a great interactive kind of post-it note exercise that any given group can do. Now, if you bring in a trainer and it's facilitated, that's great, but these are listed such that anybody, any team leader who wants to do this, that can take her or his team through this action. We wanted to make sure that these were not necessarily easy to do, but simple and well-described actions that could take people toward, in this case, agreed approach. So there are a lot of actions there. The whole report is drills down to an action plan and wants to pivot to activity. When you come through the certification workshop, which we'll talk about in just a second, the Impact and OKA have come up with this handout of 15 pages of additional exercises, some that are focused in on a particular domain and some of which do multiple duties. So here's an exercise that really effectively gets into effective relationships and quality conversations, or what it hits multiple domains at once. And so because if you don't have this ability to pivot from the diagnostic view to a therefore do this, I would say it's largely an empty exercise. And so what do? We give you lots to do. And this is where your existing toolkit, I already have the Myers-Briggs, or I already have EQ or the DISC or whatever. If you already have tools on your belt, those tools are still relevant. I think of the TPI as almost a port in which other ships can come and dock and be useful there. It's almost a management principle as this kind of underpinning diagnostic tool. So the tools you already have can easily plug into this, and these write-ups even reference that. So I would say, and if there are any, I know we're coming up towards the top of the hour. We'll be finished by 2, and we can have questions after that if you want to stick with us. But that the team profile is created from data kind of accrued from all team members. All are invited, and hopefully all team members come together and collectively create this behavioral portrait of the team that reflects strengths and challenges. But the whole process is what's very data rich. It's personal, as in it's but yet still anonymous. But it's provocative. It gently provokes discussion about, is this true? Is this relevant? How do we rank order these things, and what are we going to do about it? And so it's powerful, and in that way, it feels very unique to me. In terms of the benefits, is there anything you would add to that, David, before we put the cherry on top?
I think hopefully they're clear throughout, right? Hopefully with that overview, folks are beginning to kind of get an insight into the benefits and the utility of the model and the tool.
And so somebody had asked a question earlier about certification. There's enough sensitivity about this. One, making sure that the report is used well and that is interpreted well, because it is structured on a scaffolding that looks a lot like a 360. It needs some sensitivity about how you set it up, how you debrief it, how you use it, and then of course you're touching some sensitive places in team development. And so there is a certification workshop. It's 1 day. It is offered by OKA, and so right now I'm the one that's teaching those. They're here in person in Fairfax, Virginia, for single-day workshops, but we also have online real-time opportunities as well. And so where we get together and do an online training for a day. It's the same cost for those, but we have a couple coming up, one in the fall and one in December. And so if you're interested in more information, would like to register for those, or you certainly feel free to contact us here at OKA. You can contact directly Aaron Sanders, Sanders at OKA-online.com if you want more specific data. And so what questions in the remaining any chance to discuss how you could certify without flying over to Fairfax? So, Rolf, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, there's an online event. The last TPI certification I had somebody not too far from you in Europe. So it would be great to see you there, Rolf, if we can do that with you. And so so I am in the time we have left, I am interested in whatever questions that you have in the model and the tool, something we perhaps haven't yet touched on. What questions do you have? What's the cost of the assessment? That's not a bad question. And you want to go ahead and take that one?
It's $275 for the report, meaning per team. Doesn't matter the team size. It's just simply that, when you go to download a report for whatever team you've done, it'll be $275 per team. When you go through the certification, you get a code for your first one for free.
The nice thing about that, Gene, as I've been using it, is that generally when I go in and do a team training with another tool, every person on that team needs to take some assessment, and then all of those assessments are kind of lumped together to create a team report. And this is the 275 for the entire team, and now everybody can get a printout of that team. But in terms of instrument cost, this is actually the least costly that I have. In terms of, so it makes it a nicely affordable option. And so I'll take this one. Ben says, can anyone use the TPI assessment without being certified? No, you can't administer it without being certified. Now, one of the things we do teach in the training is we really do a deep dive on the model, because I found myself using the TPI often. I like using it when I can, but I find myself using the TPI model constantly. I mean, that now I don't engage with groups that I don't think about and start to see unified purpose and external alignment and high performance mindset. It emerges. And so there are ways you can use this as a structure, as a model, and it's very helpful. But the tool itself does require the certification. There's enough sensitivity around it.
Which means you could access the TPI assessment through a certified coach. So, you could access that through Heil at OKA. You could access it through Impact without yourself being certified.
Okay. Oh, good detail. How many people, how about minimum, maximum numbers there, David?
Minimum is 3, and that's primarily from an anonymity confidentiality standpoint from the tool itself. So the minimum is 3. When we start to talk about maximums, there's no maximum. What we start to talk about is back to that intentionality of who we're surveying. So, and it's priced the way it is so that we don't run the risk of someone saying, well, to save money, let's put 60 people through it who are part of this department, when that 60 people is made up of, 7 or 8 intact teams, when we really probably want to be surveying those intact teams as one stage, and the larger department as a different stage. Because when we're answering those questions in the team performance inventory, we're answering them as a member of whatever team or group we're being considered as a part of. So there's no maximum number because of that, because there's value in doing different numbers. The max, I would say, is more about being intentional about the team that you are surveying and why you're surveying that group, organization, or team.
That's good. What would you say to Ryan here? Have you identified anything particularly interesting about the many teams that you've done? You've done so many actually over the years. Is unified or unified purpose or agreed approach? Are there trends that are
it actually points to another great question around normative database. And while we have a normative database, and we do some testing against the tool as we've been developing it, we don't use it at this time for any specific utility with regards to teams in that database. We may in the future. It does point to interesting things. What we're doing now is really testing through that data and looking, and making sure that we're telling the right stories. So we're doing more in-depth case studies with clients right now to take a team through a journey of research with regards to stakeholder feedback for that team, actual performance metrics, doing the TPI, and then linking all that back. Having said that, with the database that we do have, and that database is about 700 teams, which is about 6,500 team members, and that database is the current iteration of the team performance inventory. As I mentioned, it's been in development for a good 7-8 years, and it's been changing. So the big, huge database is thousands of teams. However, it starts to become irrelevant because we were asking different questions. The domains were going through some testing. So that 700-person team data gives us some interesting insight into reported gaps and effective relationships, for instance, comes up as probably the lowest rated one, whereas unified purpose oftentimes comes up as a higher rated domain, for example. And again, we haven't really started to release tons of data on the normative on that database. However, it's starting to produce some interesting trends. And even question by question, the critical aspect questions, those 5 Likert scale questions, start to have interesting insights into what we say about ourselves as teams. So there's more on that coming in the next year.
That's interesting. David, you and I hadn't talked about that, and all I had was my own anecdotal information, but that happens to be that effective relationships is the lowest and unified purpose is the highest. So it's funny that my little corner of anecdotal data happens to reflect that. That was a great question, Ryan. Thank you. We appreciate your interest in the TPI and carving out some time this afternoon. If there are things that you would like in terms of more information on the TPI about this model, you can reach out to us. The best place to get us is through OKA here. This has been recorded, and so we will. You can have access to this webinar. If there's somebody else that you would like to send it to, we will actually send you the link so that you will have it if you wish to share that. But I hope to see you here, and I hope that we can continue this exploration and discussion of the TPI. But thank you for your attention this afternoon, and have a great
Thanks very
fall.
much.
Thank you, David.